So we have three different ecosystem roles that we discussed so far. We have our producers, which do photosynthesis, our consumers, which do cellular respiration, and also our decomposers, which are also undergoing cellular respiration. And again, as a note, plants or producers undergo cellular respiration as well, but they do photosynthesis, whereas the others don't. But how do those organisms interact in the ecosystem? So we'll talk a little bit about food chains, and a lot of this is probably a review of basic concepts you may have learned a long time ago, but want to get everyone on the same page. So here we have a food chain, or more specifically, this is called a trophic pyramid, just by the way that it's represented. But it's still showing the same kind of information. You got these guys eating these guys, which are eating these guys. That word trophic essentially means feeding level. So this is the feeding level each of these organisms are at. So we have our producers and our consumers, but as you can see, our consumers are numbered based on where they are in the food chain. So we have primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so on. It's also pyramid shaped, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit, but the fact that this is a pyramid is actually significant. So let's talk about each of the different steps of this trophic pyramid. At the very bottom are the producers. They get their energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis. This includes, grasses, trees, don't forget that algae in the ocean. Even some types of bacteria are photosynthesizers. This is also the largest part of our trophic pyramid. And as you could see in the earlier image, the trophic pyramid started with the producers. All trophic pyramids, no matter where, will start with producers. And really, all our energy comes from the sun, ultimately. So, as I had mentioned before, just because you don't like fruits and vegetables doesn't mean you're not getting your energy from them. Somewhere along the way, producers are fueling the rest of this trophic pyramid. This will become more pertinent a little bit later, but you can also shorthand producers with a P. And when we go to labeling food chains and food webs, that P matters. The next step up are our primary consumers. So they are consumers, so they're eating something else. Primary referring to they're the first consumers in the food chain. These guys are our herbivores. They are eating all of the producers. So since they are only eating plant matter, only eating fruits and vegetables, that is why they're herbivores. This primary consumer can be shorthanded with a 1, and then this little degree symbol, this means primary. And this is a way to shorthand it, because again, that'll be more important later on. But some examples, you got ants, spiders, moths, rats, a lot of insects are primary consumers. All right, the next rung up are secondary consumers. These guys are feeding on primary consumers. You can kind of see a trend here. They can be carnivores because they're just eating a primary consumer. They could also be an omnivore. Maybe they're eating both. So humans kind of fall here. Here's us. Maybe you eat a cow. And then the cow is eating grass. Or you're eating a chicken. Chicken eats corn. Or you're eating sheep. Sheep eats grass. Most of the meats that we eat are primary consumers, which makes us a secondary consumer. But in some respects, we're still a primary consumer. When we eat a salad, when we are eating, almonds, we're eating a producer. So this is a key note. Organisms can be in more than one. Just because you're a secondary, excuse me, just because you're a secondary consumer doesn't mean you can't be a primary consumer. You can fit into more trophic tiers in the trophic pyramid. It's not you're just one and that's it. It really depends on what you're eating. And then we can keep going up. We have tertiary. Tertiary would be the 3 degree. Quaternary, this would be the 4 in the degree. And these guys are just eating secondary consumers, or they're eating tertiary consumers. You could go up to 5, 6, 7, but pyramids and food chains usually don't get that high. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. So you're really not going to see like a 10-ary level. And maybe you might see at most 6, but most of the food pyramids, or trophic pyramids you'll see in this class, might end at like 5. You don't really need to know the names. As long as you can shorthand it to this 3, 4, 5, etc., you're fine. But again, they're eating on the tier below them. The reason this is a quaternary consumer is because one of the foods it's eating is a tertiary consumer. But something you may have noticed, I didn't cover all the ecosystem roles. I talked about producers and I talked about consumers, but we're missing one. Which one are we missing? Well, we're missing those detritivores, those decomposers. Where are the vultures in that? Where were the fungi and the worms? You'll never see them in a food chain. You'll never see them in a trophic pyramid because they're everywhere, all over the place in a food chain or in a trophic pyramid. They still serve incredibly important functions, though. One, they remove the remains of organisms. So you don't have carcasses laying everywhere on the forest floor or in a grassland. So one of the things they do is they're just breaking up old material. In that process of breaking up that old material, breaking up those bones that no other animals can eat, breaking down those tissues that things just don't consume, they're actually recycling the nutrients that was in that bone, in that muscle, in that fur. The nutrients that made up that tissue are actually going back into the soil. That's serving as nutrients for more producers, and those producers will get consumed, and those consumers will die, and they'll decompose, and you get the gist. So decomposers, if I look back at this trophic pyramid, they're everywhere. When a secondary consumer dies, a decomposer eats it. When a primary consumer dies, a decomposer eats it. When a quaternary consumer dies, a decomposer eats it. So that's why decomposers aren't found on a trophic pyramid, because they're eating things when they die. It doesn't matter what level it was at. It's a dead organism. They're not hunting a tertiary consumer. They're just taking advantage that a tertiary consumer has died, and now it's breaking it down. So although not pictured in that trophic pyramid, still incredibly important, and it kind of maintains this structure.